This is an audio-only horror story. I want you to close your eyes in. 3, 2, 1, 0. Use your imagination as you listen, and use your imagination to invoke a scene. Enjoy the ride.
My name is Kyle Matthews, and I've always been the type to embrace adventure. So when my friends, Laura, Mike, and Jenna, invited me to go camping in Pinewood Forest on Friday the 13th, I didn't hesitate. Sure, it was a day associated with bad luck and superstition, but we were seasoned campers. How could a date ruin our plans? Laura, our unofficial leader, and always the one to come up with wild ideas, had been bubbling with excitement about this trip. You guys, it's going to be amazing. Pinewood Forest is perfect this time of year. We'll have a great time. Mike, ever the skeptic, grinned. And you know what they say about Friday the 13th? Nothing like a little extra thrill to make it memorable. Jenna, who had a knack for the dramatic, added, I heard Pinewood has some pretty creepy legends. It'll be the perfect backdrop for a ghost story or two. We packed our gear, including a tent, sleeping bags, a cooler full of food, and all the essentials. As I loaded my backpack into the car, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. My grandmother had always been superstitious, warning me about the dangers of Friday the 13th. But I pushed the thoughts aside and joined my friends. The drive to Pinewood Forest was filled with laughter and anticipation. The forest was about an hour away from the city, nestled in a remote area known for its dense woods and tranquil beauty. The sun was setting as we arrived, casting long shadows across the landscape. We reached the campsite just as twilight was descending. Pinewood Forest lived up to its name. Tall pines stretched towards the sky, their branches swaying in the gentle breeze. The clearing where we set up camp was picturesque, with a small, clear stream running nearby. Mike took charge of setting up the tent while Laura and Jenna arranged the campfire. I gathered firewood, adding to the growing pile. The atmosphere was light and jovial as we prepared for a night under the stars. As the fire crackled and the sky darkened, we settled around it, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Jenna, with her flair for the dramatic, began recounting local legends about Pinewood Forest. Her voice lowered to a whisper as she spoke of a family that had disappeared there decades ago, leaving behind only a mysterious symbol carved into a tree. There's something about this place, Jenna said, glancing around the darkening forest. They say it's cursed. The symbol is supposed to protect against evil spirits, but it might also attract them. Laura laughed. Come on, Jenna. Don't let old ghost stories ruin our fun. It's just folklore. Mike nodded in agreement. Yeah, we're here to have a good time, not to get spooked by campfire tales. As the night wore on, the forest grew quieter. The usual sounds of wildlife seemed to vanish, leaving an unsettling silence. I noticed a chill in the air and tried to shake off the creeping sense of dread that seemed to settle over me. We turned in for the night around midnight. The fire had burned down to embers, casting flickering shadows on the inside of the tent. As I lay in my sleeping bag, the silence outside was occasionally broken by the sound of the stream and distant, inexplicable noises. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a soft, scratching sound coming from outside the tent. I listened intently, trying to discern what it was. The sound continued intermittently, growing louder. I nudged Mike, who was sleeping beside me. Mike, do you hear that? I whispered. He groaned, half asleep. Yeah, I hear it. Probably just an animal. Go back to sleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I unzipped the tent slightly and peeked outside. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I saw nothing unusual, but couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched. In the morning, I decided to take a walk around the campsite to clear my head. The forest was serene, the early sunlight casting a warm glow through the trees. As I wandered along the stream, I came across an old, gnarled tree with a carving etched into its bark. The symbol was crude but unmistakable, a rough circle with intersecting lines. It matched the description from Jenna's ghost story. I took a photo with my phone, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. When I returned to the campsite, I showed the photo to Laura, Mike, and Jenna. Jenna's face went pale as she examined the carving. "That's it," she said, her voice trembling. "That's the symbol from the legend." Laura's expression turned serious. "Maybe we should pack up and leave. It's not worth risking our safety over some old story." Mike, ever the skeptic, shrugged. "It's probably just a coincidence. Let's not overreact." We debated for a while, but eventually decided to stay. We reasoned that it was likely just a coincidence and that we were letting our imaginations get the best of us. We spent the rest of the day hiking and exploring, trying to push aside the lingering sense of unease. As evening approached, we returned to the campsite to prepare dinner. The forest seemed quieter than usual, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer and darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond our view. While preparing food, I noticed a figure standing in the distance between the trees. It was a shadowy shape, barely visible in the twilight. I blinked, and it was gone. I dismissed it as a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. After dinner, we sat around the campfire again, attempting to enjoy the evening. The atmosphere was tense, and our earlier joviality had faded. We took turns telling stories, but the sense of foreboding never left. Around midnight, the temperature dropped suddenly, and the wind picked up, causing the tent to flap violently. The strange noises from the previous night returned, soft whispers and distant cries that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. Jenna was visibly shaken. "I can't take this anymore. I'm really scared." Laura tried to comfort her. "It's probably just the wind. We'll be fine." Mike, trying to lighten the mood, suggested we play a game. We played cards and told jokes, but the oppressive atmosphere made it difficult to relax. The whispers grew louder, and the wind howled like a mournful wail. Suddenly, the campfire went out, plunging us into darkness. We scrambled to relight it, but the flames refused to catch. The darkness felt suffocating, and the forest seemed to close in around us. The whispers grew louder, becoming distinct voices that seemed to echo through the trees. We huddled together, trying to stay calm. The cries grew more frantic, and I could hear footsteps approaching, though I couldn't see anyone. Suddenly, Jenna was gone. We searched frantically, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. The forest was eerily silent, the whispers now replaced by an oppressive stillness. We split up to search for Jenna, but the forest seemed to twist and turn in confusing ways. The path back to the campsite was no longer clear, and we struggled to find our way. As we wandered, I saw the shadowy figure again, moving among the trees. It seemed to watch us, its form shifting and changing. My heart raced, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. After hours of searching, we returned to the campsite, exhausted and terrified. Jenna was still missing, and we had no idea what had happened. The campfire was still out, and the tent had been slashed open, its contents scattered. We decided to leave immediately, but our car wouldn't start. It was as if something had sabotaged it. We were stranded in the forest with no way to contact the outside world. As dawn approached, the forest seemed to come alive with an eerie glow. The whispers returned, and the shadowy figure appeared once more, this time closer than ever. We could see its eyes, burning coals of malevolent intent. The figure began to speak, its voice a chilling, guttural rasp. "You should have left. Now you are mine." In a desperate attempt to escape, we grabbed what supplies we could and fled into the forest. The shadowy figure pursued us, its form shifting and twisting as it moved. The forest seemed to close in around us, and every step felt like a struggle against an unseen force. We followed the stream, hoping it would lead us to safety. The whispers grew louder, and the figure's cries echoed through the trees. We pushed forward, driven by sheer panic and determination. Finally, we emerged from the forest and found ourselves at a small road. A passing car stopped, and we begged the driver for help. We were taken to a nearby town, where we contacted the authorities. The police conducted a search of Pinewood Forest, but they found no trace of Jenna. The campsite was abandoned, and there was no evidence of what had happened. The authorities were baffled, and the case remained unsolved. Laura, Mike, and I returned home, but the experience had left us deeply scarred. We tried to make sense of what had happened, but the memories of that night haunted us. Pinewood Forest was a place of darkness and terror, and we vowed never to return. The symbol carved into the tree remained a mystery, and Jenna's disappearance became a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. As for me, I still have nightmares about that night, about the shadowy figure and the whispers in the dark. Every Friday the 13th, I feel a shiver of fear, remembering the horror that unfolded in Pinewood Forest. There's a certain magic to the wilderness that tugs at the soul of every adventurer. My name is Ethan Cole, and for as long as I can remember, the thrill of the unknown has called to me. When I discovered Pine Hollow, a secluded camping spot my grandfather had mentioned in passing, I felt an irresistible urge to explore it. The stories he'd told were filled with half-truths and legends, and I wanted to experience the wilderness in its raw, untamed form. On a crisp September morning with a clear blue sky above, I packed up my old truck with camping gear, a well-worn tent, and supplies for a weekend in the forest. I'd invited my friend Jake along, an avid camper who'd reluctantly agreed, more out of curiosity than enthusiasm. We were to spend 3 nights at Pine Hollow, a place rumored to be both beautiful and eerie, untouched by modern civilization. As we drove away from the city, the landscape gradually transformed from concrete and steel to rolling hills and dense trees. Pine Hollow was said to be hidden deep within a remote section of the forest, a spot that was off the beaten path and rarely visited. The drive was scenic, but took longer than expected, the road narrowing into a rough trail that tested the limits of my old truck. Jake, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke up. "Are you sure this is the right way? The GPS is completely useless out here." I glanced at the faded map my grandfather had given me, the edges frayed from years of use. "This is it. The map says we should be close. Besides, part of the adventure is getting lost, right?" Jake rolled his eyes but didn't argue. We continued along the narrow path, the forest closing in around us, the light filtering through the canopy in thin, scattered beams. By late afternoon, we reached a small clearing that matched the description on the map. It was a perfect spot, surrounded by tall pines and overlooking a tranquil lake that shimmered in the fading light. The scenery was breathtaking, just as my grandfather had described. We unloaded the truck and set up our camp, Jake grumbling about the lack of cell service and the uncomfortable terrain. "Remind me again why I agreed to this," Jake muttered as he helped pitch the tent. "Because you love an adventure," I replied with a grin, "and because I promised it would be fun." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the campsite. We built a fire, its crackling warmth a comforting contrast to the encroaching chill of the evening. As we roasted marshmallows and reminisced about old times, the forest seemed to settle into a deep, eerie quiet. The only sounds were the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Jake poked at the fire with a stick. "This place is amazing. It's like we're completely cut off from the world." "Yeah," I agreed, "just the way I like it." That night, as we lay in our sleeping bags, the tranquility of Pine Hollow began to feel a bit unsettling. The wind howled through the trees, and the shadows cast by the firelight danced in eerie patterns. The forest seemed to whisper, the sounds blending into a low, almost musical hum. I awoke in the dead of night to a strange sensation. It was as if someone or something was watching me. The tent was stiflingly hot, and I unzipped it slightly to let in some fresh air. The fog was beginning to roll in, shrouding the forest in a dense, ghostly veil. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't just the wind, they were actual voices, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. My heart raced as I listened, trying to pinpoint where the sounds were coming from. I nudged Jake awake. "Hey, do you hear that?" Jake groaned. "What time is it? I don't hear anything." "You're not awake enough," I insisted, straining to hear over the whispers. "Just listen." Jake sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Okay, I hear something now, but it's probably just the wind or something." I wasn't so sure. There was an unsettling quality to the whispers, a sense of something ancient and malevolent. I tried to calm my racing thoughts and forced myself to go back to sleep, but the whispers continued, a persistent, haunting presence. The next morning, the fog had lifted, revealing a sunlit forest that seemed almost too serene. We decided to explore the area, hoping to get a better sense of our surroundings. Jake and I packed some supplies and followed a trail that led deeper into the woods. After a few hours of hiking, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It was weathered and dilapidated, with broken windows and a sagging roof. It looked like something out of a horror movie. "Wow, this is creepy," Jake said, eyeing the cabin warily. "Are we really going in there?" "Why not?" I replied, feeling an odd sense of excitement. It's part of the adventure. We approached the cabin cautiously, the floorboards creaking beneath our feet. Inside, the air was musty and stale, filled with the smell of decay. Dust-covered furniture and broken relics of a bygone era lay scattered around. On a dusty shelf, I found an old journal. The leather cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. I flipped through it, my curiosity piqued by the faded entries and sketches. "Hey, check this out," I said to Jake, handing him the journal. "This looks like it belonged to someone who used to live here." Jake glanced at the journal and frowned. "It's all in some weird language. I can't make out any of it." I continued to flip through the pages, finding strange symbols and references to rituals. One entry, in particular, caught my eye, a warning about the darkness of Pine Hollow and the ancient watchers that dwell within the forest. "This is weird," I said, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "It looks like the person who lived here was really into some dark stuff." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Are you seriously believing this old journal? It's probably just some local legend." I wasn't so sure. The entries seemed too detailed, too specific. As we left the cabin and made our way back to camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the shadows. That night, the whispers returned, more insistent than before. The wind howled through the trees, and the fog rolled in again, thicker and more oppressive. Jake and I sat by the fire, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Jake asked, his voice filled with unease. "Maybe we should head back to civilization." I shook my head. "We're fine. It's probably just the wind. Let's enjoy the night." But as the hours passed, the whispers grew louder, merging into a chorus of voices that seemed to call out from the depths of the forest. The fire flickered and dimmed, casting eerie shadows that danced across the campsite. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the night, followed by a low, guttural growl. Jake and I exchanged terrified glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. "What was that?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, my own fear evident in my voice. "But we need to check it out." We grabbed our flashlights and ventured into the foggy darkness, our footsteps muffled by the thick layer of mist. The forest was eerily quiet, the whispers now replaced by an oppressive silence. We followed the sound of the growl, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes. The air was heavy with a sense of impending doom. Suddenly, we came upon a clearing, and in the center stood a tall, shadowy figure. It was indistinct, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, malevolent light. Jake gasped, stumbling back. "What is that thing?" "I don't know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But we need to get out of here." The figure moved closer, its presence filling the clearing with a palpable sense of fear. The whispers returned, louder and more frenzied, blending into a cacophony of voices. We turned and fled, racing back toward the campsite. The fog seemed to close in around us, making it difficult to see. The whispers followed us, a haunting reminder of the presence that lurked in the darkness. Back at the campsite, the fire had nearly gone out, and the darkness seemed to press in on us from all sides. Jake and I huddled together, trying to calm our racing hearts. "This is insane," Jake said, his voice shaking. "We need to leave. Now." I nodded in agreement, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. The forest seemed to be alive, its whispers a constant reminder of the entity that haunted the woods. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a maddening cacophony that drove us to the brink of insanity. I tried to keep my mind focused, but the fear was overwhelming. The figure we had seen was not of this world, and the whispers seemed to seep into my very soul, filling me with an indescribable terror. Morning light brought little relief. The fog had lifted, but the forest still seemed menacing. Jake and I decided to pack up and leave, but the forest had other plans. As we packed our gear, the whispers returned, louder and more urgent than ever. The shadows seemed to move, and the trees appeared to shift, closing in around us. Suddenly, the shadowy figure appeared again, its presence more terrifying than before. It moved with an unnatural speed, its eyes burning with a fierce, otherworldly light. Jake and I fled in panic, racing through the forest, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The whispers grew louder, blending into a roar of voices that seemed to chase us. We stumbled upon the old cabin again, its presence now more foreboding than ever. The figure loomed behind us, its growl echoing through the forest. In a desperate attempt to escape, we barricaded ourselves in the cabin, using furniture and debris to block the door. The whispers grew louder, and the figure pounded on the walls, its rage palpable. Hours passed, the terror relentless. We could hear the figure outside, its growls and howls a constant reminder of the horror that awaited us. The whispers were now a maddening cacophony, filling the cabin with an oppressive sense of dread. Just as we thought all hope was lost, the figure suddenly vanished, and the whispers ceased. The silence was deafening, the forest eerily quiet. We cautiously emerged from the cabin, the sun now high in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. We made our way back to the truck, the forest seemingly returning to its tranquil state. The figure was gone, and the whispers had faded into the background. But the terror of the past few days lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked in Pine Hollow. As we drove away from the forest, the sense of relief was tempered by the memory of what we had experienced. Pine Hollow was a place of beauty and terror, a place where ancient forces lurked in the shadows. I don't know if anyone will believe our story, but I know what we saw and heard was real. Pine Hollow is a place of darkness, a place where the veil between this world and the next is thin. And though we survived, I know that the whispers and the shadowy figure will forever haunt my dreams.
There's something uniquely exhilarating about venturing into the wild, far from the comforts of civilization. My name is Alex, and for as long as I can remember, I've been drawn to the thrill of exploring untamed places. This weekend was supposed to be no different, a routine camping trip to escape the monotony of daily life. But the forest we were heading into wasn't on any of the maps, and that was precisely why it fascinated me. It all started when I stumbled across an old, leather-bound journal in the attic of my grandfather's cabin. He was an avid explorer, a man who loved to tell tales of distant lands and uncharted territories. The journal was filled with notes, sketches, and faded maps, but what caught my eye was a peculiar, hand-drawn map leading to a trail that didn't appear on any modern charts. I'd always respected my grandfather's adventurous spirit, but this map promised something deeper, something older. With my best friend Sam and his girlfriend Jessica, who had reluctantly agreed to come along, I set out to discover what lay hidden on this forgotten path. "Are you sure this is safe?" Jessica asked as she loaded her gear into the back of my SUV. "Safe?" It's an adventure, I replied with a grin, trying to mask the thrill of excitement. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Sam chuckled, shaking his head. You're such a thrill seeker, Alex. I just hope you've got a good backup plan if we get lost. I waved him off. We won't get lost. The map's pretty straightforward. By the time we arrived at the trailhead, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of adventure. The forest seemed to welcome us with open arms, its canopy rustling gently in the breeze. We unloaded our gear and set up camp in a clearing not far from where the map indicated the trail began. There was an eerie sense of anticipation as we worked, a feeling that something was waiting just beyond our sight. Have you ever felt like a place is just different? Jessica asked, glancing around the clearing with a shiver. Different how? I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Like it's alive, she said, her voice trailing off as if she'd just realized how strange her own words sounded. Sam laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Maybe you're just spooked by the idea of this hidden trail. It's probably just an overgrown path that nobody uses anymore. As we settled in for the night, the fire crackled cheerfully, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on our eyes. We roasted marshmallows and told stories, the warmth of the fire a comforting contrast to the growing darkness around us. As the hours passed, the forest around us fell silent. The usual nighttime symphony of crickets and rustling leaves faded, replaced by an unsettling stillness. The air grew colder, and a thick fog began to creep into the clearing. I was the first to notice it. A faint whisper carried on the breeze, barely audible but distinct. I glanced at Sam and Jessica, who were already curled up in their sleeping bags. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hear what?" Sam mumbled without opening his eyes. "Never mind," I said, shaking off the uneasy feeling. It was probably just the wind playing tricks on me. But as the night deepened, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from every direction, blending into a low, almost rhythmic hum. I lay awake in my tent, my heart pounding as the whispers grew clearer. They were indistinguishable, like a chorus of voices speaking in an unknown language. Suddenly, there was a loud crack outside, like a branch breaking. I bolted upright, straining to hear over the cacophony of whispers. The noise was followed by a heavy thud, like something, or someone, moving through the underbrush. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent, stepping outside into the fog. The beam of the flashlight cut through the mist, illuminating the surrounding trees and the faint outline of the trail we had planned to explore. The trailhead was now barely visible, shrouded in fog and darkness. The whispers seemed to emanate from deeper within the forest, mingling with the creaking of the trees. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized how completely alone we were. The next morning, the fog had lifted, but the forest still felt heavy, as if it were holding its breath. I tried to shake off the previous night's unease, determined to push forward with our plans. "Are you guys ready to check out the trail?" I asked over breakfast. Sam stretched and yawned. "I guess so, as long as we don't get lost." Jessica, still looking a bit pale, nodded. "Let's just get it over with." We packed our gear and headed toward the trailhead. The path was overgrown, with branches and vines encroaching on both sides. It was clear that this trail hadn't seen much use in years. "Looks like nobody's been here for a while," Sam remarked, pushing aside a low-hanging branch. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the trail grew narrower and more treacherous. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The whispers from the night before seemed to linger in the back of my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Hours into our hike, we came across an old, dilapidated cabin hidden among the trees. It was covered in moss and vines, its windows shattered and door hanging off its hinges. It looked like something out of a nightmare. "Should we check it out?" Sam asked, his curiosity evident despite the unease in his voice. "I think we should," I said, feeling a strange compulsion to explore the cabin. This could be what the map was leading us to. We approached the cabin cautiously, our footsteps muffled by the overgrown grass. Inside, the air was stale and musty. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet as we made our way through the darkened rooms, our flashlights illuminating faded, dust-covered furniture and remnants of a bygone era. In one corner of the cabin, I found a small chest. Inside, there were old, yellowed papers and strange artifacts, carved bones, feathers, and what appeared to be ritualistic symbols. "What is this stuff?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling as she examined the artifacts. "I don't know," I said, picking up a crumpled piece of paper covered in strange symbols. "But it looks like it's from some kind of old ritual, or—" Before I could finish, the ground beneath us trembled with a low rumble. The air grew colder, and the whispers from the night before seemed to grow louder, more urgent. The rumbling subsided, but the forest seemed to come alive with an oppressive presence. The once innocent hike had turned into a nightmarish experience, and the whispers were now a constant, eerie murmur in the back of my mind. "Let's get out of here," Sam said, his voice strained. "This place is freaking me out." We left the cabin quickly, retracing our steps back to the trail, but the forest had changed. Paths that had been clear were now twisted and confusing, and the trail seemed to lead us deeper into the darkness. The sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows that seemed to reach out toward us. The fog returned, thicker and more oppressive than before. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and we felt an overwhelming sense of dread. As night fell, we set up camp again, though the comfort of the fire did little to ease our growing fear. The whispers outside were now unmistakable, like voices calling out in torment. We huddled close to the fire, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the fog, dark and indistinct, moving with a fluid grace that was both mesmerizing and horrifying. It seemed to flicker in and out of existence, its form shifting like smoke. "What is that?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not real," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "It's just the fog playing tricks on us." But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The figure moved closer, its presence chilling the air around us. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting as if trying to escape the figure's grasp. The figure approached, its dark eyes glowing with an unnatural light. We scrambled to pack up our gear, the terror in our hearts pushing us to flee. The fog had become a living entity, wrapping around us and obscuring our path. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Jessica's hand and pulling her toward the trail. Sam followed closely, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. We stumbled through the forest, the whispers now a deafening roar. The figure pursued us, its presence palpable, even though we could barely see it through the dense fog. Every step felt like a step toward our doom. We reached a small clearing, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure loomed before us, its form now more defined, its eyes burning with an intense, malevolent light. "You can't escape," it seemed to say, its voice echoing in our minds. We fought against the entity, but its power was overwhelming. It fed off our fear, growing stronger with every scream, every desperate attempt to flee. I could feel my sanity slipping away as the figure closed in. In the end, only I survived. Sam and Jessica were taken by the entity, their screams echoing in the fog. I made it back to the trailhead, but the forest had changed. It was no longer a place of adventure, but a realm of horror and despair. I left a warning, though I doubt anyone will believe it. The forest remains, a place where the whispers never cease and the shadows dance with malevolent intent. And now, every time I hear a whisper in the dark, I am reminded of the trail beyond, the place where reality and nightmare merged, and where I lost everything that mattered.
When I received the email about the camping trip in Blackwood Forest, it seemed like a harmless escape from the daily grind. The invitation came from an old college friend, Lila, who now worked for a nonprofit organization promoting environmental conservation. The trip was intended to raise awareness about the forest and to celebrate its preservation. I'd always enjoyed camping, and the chance to reconnect with old friends was too tempting to pass up. As I packed my gear, I thought about the times Lila and I had spent together in college, her idealistic enthusiasm, and our shared love for nature. I had almost forgotten how quickly she had become an environmental activist. The itinerary promised a weekend of hiking, campfire stories, and stargazing. It all sounded perfect until I saw the fine print. Blackwood Forest has a rich history. Be prepared for the unknown. My friend Rob, who had recently joined me on a few weekend getaways, was skeptical. Blackwood Forest? Isn't that the place with all those ghost stories? I shrugged, trying to sound casual. Just local legends. I'm sure it'll be fine. Rob wasn't convinced, but he came along, grumbling about the lack of cell service and the absence of modern conveniences. I hoped he'd come around once we were out in the fresh air. We arrived at Blackwood Forest late in the afternoon. The dense forest loomed ahead, its canopy forming a thick wall of green that seemed to swallow the light. The air was cool and smelled of earth and pine. Lila was already there, setting up camp with her colleague Greg. He was a tall, rugged man with a serious expression, clearly dedicated to the cause. "Hey, Ethan! Rob!" Lila greeted us warmly, embracing me and giving Rob a friendly nod. "Glad you could make it. We've got everything set up and ready." The campsite was picturesque, with a clear stream running nearby and a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. We quickly unloaded our gear and joined the others by the campfire. Greg began setting up a projector for a presentation about the forest's ecosystem, while Lila shared stories about her work and the importance of preserving Blackwood. As evening fell, we gathered around the fire. The warmth was comforting, and the flickering light cast long, dancing shadows on the trees. It felt like a scene from a movie, serene and peaceful. The forest, however, had an air of mystery that was hard to ignore. "Tonight, we'll tell ghost stories," Greg announced with a hint of a smirk. "Blackwood has its fair share of legends." Rob raised an eyebrow. "Oh, great. Just what we need." Lila rolled her eyes but smiled. "Don't worry, Rob. It's all in good fun." As darkness enveloped the forest, we gathered around the campfire. The stories began innocently enough, tales of lost hikers and mysterious lights in the woods. But then Greg told a story that sent a shiver down my spine. "There's an old tale about a group of campers who vanished here decades ago," Greg said, his voice taking on a somber tone. "They were last seen near an ancient, forgotten part of the forest. Some say they were taken by something that lives in the shadows, something that feeds on fear." Rob laughed nervously. "Sounds like typical ghost story stuff." Greg's eyes darkened. "It's said that if you listen closely, you can hear their whispers in the wind." I tried to brush it off, but the unsettling feeling lingered. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and the shadows around the campfire grew longer, more menacing. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped and a dense fog began to roll in. It was as if the forest itself was closing in on us. The whispers Greg had mentioned seemed to drift on the edges of our hearing, faint and almost imperceptible. I lay in my tent, trying to sleep, but the whispers kept me awake. They were too faint to understand, but the tone was unmistakably eerie. I tried to dismiss it as the wind, but the sound grew clearer, a soft, mournful murmur that seemed to come from just beyond the fabric of my tent. I must have dozed off at some point because I was jolted awake by a loud thud outside. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent, stepping out into the foggy night. The forest was shrouded in a ghostly haze, and the trees seemed to loom closer than before. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, only the unsettling quiet of the fog. Suddenly, I heard a low, guttural growl, a sound unlike anything I had ever heard. It seemed to come from the direction of the old, overgrown part of the forest Greg had mentioned. My heart raced, and I hurried back to the tent, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. The next morning, I found Rob pacing nervously outside the tent. "Did you hear that last night?" he asked, his face pale. "Yeah," I admitted. "I thought it was just my imagination." Lila and Greg joined us for breakfast, but their usual enthusiasm was dampened by the eerie atmosphere. The fog had lifted, but the forest still felt oppressive. "We should check out the old part of the forest," Lila suggested. "Maybe we can find out more about the stories Greg told." Rob was hesitant, but he agreed to come along. We followed a narrow, winding trail that led deeper into the forest. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around us, their branches casting long, twisted shadows. After an hour of hiking, we came across a clearing with the remnants of an old, dilapidated cabin. It was covered in moss and vines, its windows shattered and door hanging off its hinges. "This must be it," Greg said, his voice tinged with excitement and apprehension. The cabin from the stories. We approached the cabin cautiously, our footsteps muffled by the thick layer of leaves. Inside, the air was musty and filled with the smell of decay. Dust-covered furniture and broken relics lay scattered around. Lila found an old journal on a rotting table. "Look at this," she said, flipping through the pages. "It's filled with strange symbols and notes about rituals." Greg's face grew grim. "This is definitely related to the legends. We should be careful." As we left the cabin, the fog began to roll in again, thicker and more oppressive than before. We made our way back to the campsite, but as we approached, we realized that something was wrong. Rob was missing. "Rob," I called out, my voice echoing through the forest. "Where are you?" We searched the campsite and the surrounding area, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. Panic set in as the shadows grew longer, and the whispers returned, more insistent and menacing. Lila and Greg were beside themselves with worry. "We need to find him," Lila said, her voice trembling. "He couldn't have gone far." We split up and searched the forest, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The whispers seemed to follow us, their eerie tones blending into a haunting melody. The fog thickened, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Hours passed, and the search proved fruitless. We were exhausted, our nerves frayed by the constant whispers and the oppressive darkness. The forest seemed to close in around us, its trees shifting and twisting in the fog. "We have to go back to the cabin," Greg suggested. "It might be our best chance of finding him." We reluctantly agreed and made our way back to the old cabin. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if they were guiding us toward the cabin. Inside, the atmosphere was even more unsettling. The journal Lila had found seemed to take on a life of its own, its pages rustling as if stirred by an unseen hand. The symbols and notes seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Suddenly, we heard a noise outside, a faint, distant cry. It was Rob's voice, but it was distorted, as if coming from a great distance. "We have to go," Lila shouted, her voice breaking. "Rob needs us." We rushed outside, but the fog was now impenetrable. The cries grew fainter, swallowed by the darkness. The forest seemed to mock our attempts to find him, its shadows shifting and obscuring our path. As we wandered through the forest, the whispers became a chorus of anguished voices. They spoke of ancient rituals and forgotten gods, their tones filled with a deep, primal fear. In the distance, we saw a flickering light, a small, faint glow that seemed to beckon us. We followed it, hoping it would lead us to Rob. The light led us to an ancient stone circle, its stones weathered and covered in strange symbols. In the center of the circle stood a figure, a dark, shadowy presence that seemed to merge with the fog. The figure was tall and thin, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It moved with an otherworldly grace, its presence filling the clearing with an oppressive sense of dread. "This is it," Greg whispered, his voice trembling. "This is what the legends spoke of." The figure raised its arms and the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to merge into a single, haunting chant. The fog thickened, and the forest seemed to close in around us. The figure began to move toward us, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. The whispers grew louder, their tones filled with a sense of urgency and fear. It was as if the figure was feeding off our terror, growing stronger with every passing moment. Lila and I tried to back away, but the fog seemed to hold us in place. The figure reached out with its shadowy arms, and the whispers became a deafening roar. Suddenly, Rob appeared in the clearing, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. He seemed disoriented, as if he had been lost in a nightmare. "Rob," I shouted, reaching out to him. "Come on, we have to get out of here." Rob stumbled toward us, but the figure blocked our path. Its presence was overwhelming, its eyes burning with an intense, malevolent light. The whispers became a torrent of voices, their tones filled with anguish and despair. The figure's growls grew louder, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to shake the very earth. In a desperate attempt to escape, I grabbed Rob and Lila, pulling them toward the edge of the clearing. The figure lunged at us, its shadowy form stretching toward us with a terrifying speed. We finally broke free of the clearing, the fog lifting slightly as we emerged from the forest. The whispers faded, replaced by the quiet rustling of leaves and the distant sound of the stream. We made our way back to the campsite, exhausted and terrified. Rob was shaken but unharmed, though he seemed to be in a state of shock. The following morning, we packed up our gear and left Blackwood Forest behind. The forest seemed to watch us as we drove away, its shadows and whispers lingering in our minds. I don't know if anyone will believe our story, but I know what we experienced was real. Blackwood Forest is a place of darkness and ancient malevolence, a place where the veil between this world and the next is thin. And though we escaped, I know that the whispers of Blackwood will haunt my dreams forever.
As the final echoes of the tale fade into the darkness, remember this: in the shadows where fear takes root, the true horror lies not in the creatures that lurk, but in the darkness within ourselves. We tell these stories not just to scare or entertain, but to confront the fears that we try so hard to ignore. So as you step back into the light of the real world, carry with you the lessons of the night. The monsters we create are reflections of our deepest anxieties, and the strength to overcome them is within each of us. Sleep well, and remember, in the realm of fear, we are the true masters of our fate. Good night, and may your dreams be free of shadows. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and click the notification bell for you to see my future update on this channel. Stay safe and always remember to lock your doors.